Our next speaker is Ben Carson with RIT.
So, yes, I am Ben Carson, and yes, it's a big pain in the rear. I get in the mic. So, over the last few years, I've been taking a look at some of the fish communities within several tributaries of Lake Ontario, and comparing them back to what they are now, back to a historical data set. The tributaries I've been looking at are those that are located just west of the city of Rochester and the Genesee River. They are Round Pond Creek, Larkin Creek, Northrop Creek, Buttonwood Creek, and Salmon Creek. The overall scope of this is to obviously just better understand the fish communities of the past and present within these tributaries. And this ended up being kind of a two-part study. The first part was analyzing the historic data set that was collected by Albert Haynes and Wright in the early 1900s. The second part was then comparing Wright's data to a data set that I then collected presently from the very same tributaries, which was a very unique opportunity. So Wright's study was intended to be published as a peer-reviewed article in a museum, New York State Museum Bulletin in the 1920s. This publication never happened, and it wasn't until Robert Daniels rediscovered the manuscript and the printing plates and everything that was there for this to be printed, and was finally able to get Wright's study published posthumously in 2006 in Guelph Videology Reviews. Daniels also published a companion article along with Wright's article describing the process of finding it and getting it then ready to actually be published presently. So Wright surveyed 10 Lake Ontario streams, the 5 tributaries we talked about before, and then 5 tributaries of those tributaries. And what made his study rather unique for his time period was that he compared he recorded the fish that he found, of course, along with the habitat, the various physical habitat parameters that he found those fish in. Stream depth, width, elevation, and substrate. He then chose to display his data in a very unique, but elegant and rather busy-looking graphical analysis. This is an example of one of Wright's stream graphs, and this is always the part that kills me for time, but I'll try and run you through it real quick just so you know what we're looking at here. Set this guy down. We have the big part up top is the species field. The left-hand margin indicates the source of the stream, or excuse me, the mouth of the stream. The right-hand margin indicating the source of the stream. And he has that broken down by river mile. Down the left margin here are all the species that Wright found. And they are indicated as to where in the stream he found those species by these dark bars coming out laterally here. Across the top of the graph are the various substrates he found within the course of the stream, again broken down by river mile. And down below it, all the various stream flow conditions that he found within the stream, again by river mile. Within the species field itself are 2 more graphs, these 2 line graphs. The top one indicates the stream depth throughout the course of the stream, and that's graduated out in feet down the right-hand margin of the paper. And the lower one is elevation, again graduated out in feet. Below that we have the various unique habitat types he found along the way, wetlands, as well as any tributaries, bridges, dams, etc. He also has below that the stream width, again graduated out in feet. And this is the fun one. This is the cross-sectional view of the valley floor. This is one where you have to kind of put your head to the side and pretend that you're standing in the middle of the stream, and imagine that you can see the valley floor going out beside you. So with this graphical analysis, I wanted to perform a modern statistical analysis on rights data as a basis, as a way of comparing my future study, as well as looking at, as well as comparing the, I don't want to say the validity, but the accuracy of rights interpretations also. So what I did was to extract the data that I needed, being the fish data and the habitat types, using a presence or absence methodology from Wright's graphical analysis. With that, I then removed the rarest occurrences of fish as well as habitat types, just to prevent the extremely rare species and habitats from skewing the data at all. I then performed a canonical correspondence analysis on Wright's data set and compared Wright's interpretations of his graphical analysis of his data to my interpretations of the CCA analysis of his data. So this is the ordination diagram, the output from the CCA. The fish in blue, the species in blue are the fish that were a good match between my interpretations and Wright's interpretations. The species in orange are the species that were of at least a moderate match between the two. And overall, I had about 87, better than 87% of the fish were a good match, and if you add that together, then 97% of the fish were at least a partial match, which was good. And then real quick to run you through how to read one of these guys. We have all the habitat parameters emerging from the focus of the axes as vectors. The vectors, the longer the vector, the more influential that habitat type is on the distribution of the species. And all the vectors indicate increasing value as you move out. So for example, river mile down here, as you travel out this vector, you're increasing in river mile. So the fish located near the end of this vector, these are going to be your upper course fish. And conversely, if you were to travel in the opposite direction, then you're moving downstream and towards your lower course fish. And logically, as you would expect, opposed to river mile are your deepest and widest portions of the stream, the ones that are farthest downstream, closest to the mouth of the stream. The species themselves are plotted as points at the centroid of their habitat associations. Species that are plotted close to one another are species that were often found together. These are essentially your communities. So from here with Wright's data, I was then able to kind of reverse engineer a study design to match what would have likely been Wright's methodology. So I was stuck to using seine nets and dip nets to collect my fish. I then pared down both data sets again because Wright surveyed 10 streams, I surveyed 5 of those, so I had to be sure that we were using the same segments and the same streams for our comparison. I then performed a canonical correspondence again on both data sets as they've been paired to one another and compared the results. So this is Wright's data set after being paired with mine, so this is the same 5 streams that I surveyed. In this case now we have bluefish being species that are in common between my CCA analysis and Wright's CCA analysis. The redfish are fish that appear on, this is Wright's CCA, so the redfish are fish that appear on Wright's analysis and not on mine. The caveat to that is that the fish with the asterisks next to them are fish that I did find, I just did not find them often enough to include them in the CCA analysis. So now I have the communities, the various communities, with the large communities circled in red. We have, if you find River Mile, is down here. So here is our upper course community. Mud Minnow, part of the upper course community, but aptly named. We have our mid-course community, which is also kind of our cosmopolitan species. The ones that are, tolerant of a wide variety of conditions, and so they could be found in the upper course or the lower course. So the CCA tends to put them towards the middle of the graph. And we have two large lower course communities that appear to be separated largely by stream flow conditions and muddy substrates. So fast forward 100 years, these are the CCA output from mine. Again, the fish in blue are the fish that are in common. The fish in red are now fish that Wright did not encounter in his survey. And when we circle the communities, some of the differences begin to pop out. We have a much smaller, so now River Mile is up here. And every time you change the data set and rerun the CCA, things are positioned slightly different. Although if you look, River Mile is still opposite max depth and max width, so that stream gradient is there, which is a good indication that this still is logical and makes sense. So we have a much smaller upstream community, or upper course community, a large mid-course community that appears to be showing some separation, again along the, but this time along a substrate difference, vegetation being the primary driver there, or a mixed substrate. And now we only have one downstream or lower course community. So it appears that we've essentially lost an entire community of fish. So while many of the fish that made up that lower community before are still present, due to the many changes that have taken place to these streams, the physical condition of these streams over the last century, things like the expansion of agriculture in the west, urban-suburban sprawl from the city of Rochester in the east, the expansion of the Erie Canal, and the construction of Highway 531 to the south. Many of the fish have been redistributed. Wright described these streams as being very uniform from source to mouth. They really seem to follow the idea of a stream continuum. However, the streams that I encountered were anything but. They were very irregular and disjointed. If you just looked at the stream flow, my stream flow patterns were just all over the place. So the fish have been redistributed thusly, and essentially we've lost an entire community. So if we change our focus a little bit and go from the community level down to the species level, and focus, again, we're with Wright's data now, just to be sure, and focus on these four species circled in red. We have black-nosed dace and brook stickleback, which are holding closely to River Mile. Mud minnow, which is still an upper course fish with those two guys, but again, aptly named, holding to the muddy areas. And largemouth bass is our representative here for the downstream spiny ray fishes, holding to the deepest waters furthest downstream. And again, Wright in his paper describes most of these streams as being well separated in terms of the spiny rayed fish staying down below the ridge and the minnows being upstream above the ridge. So again, we fast forward 100 years, look at the same four species. Now we have black-nosed dace still holding the River Mile, but the brook stickleback and the mud minnow appear to have moved further downstream and are now holding strongly the vegetation, which is a big difference, especially for mud minnow, since if he was holding with mud, he should be up here somewhere. And the largemouth bass has moved upstream slightly and closer to the vegetation. Pardon me. Some of the possible driving factors behind this seem to be tied in with possibly the construction of Highway 531. I have found, in my surveys, I found largemouth bass, pumpkin seed, bluegill, all in the very upper stretches of some of these streams, places that they historically hadn't been 100 years ago. And so now you have a new predatory fish upstream, swimming around with minnows, and as a result, it appears we have a situation where brook stickleback and mud minnow are essentially seeking cover and finding the more heavily vegetated locations. Possible avenues for this to happen: when they constructed Highway 531, they put in a number of retention ponds for at least two of these streams now, Brown Pond Creek and Northrop Creek. These ponds serve, Larkin Creek and Northrop Creek, these ponds serve as the primary sources for these streams, especially during the wettest periods of the year. And as well, Northrop Creek and Salmon Creek have direct tie-ins to the Erie Canal. And from interviewing and speaking with fishermen along that stretch of the canal, they regularly reported having caught those species, pumpkin seed, largemouth bass, in along the canal there. So, to kind of summarize this real quick, Wright was right in terms of his descriptive analysis matched well with my analysis of the CCA of his data. His descriptive analysis also matched well to our current understanding of these fish to begin with. These streams have certainly been greatly altered over the last 100 years, and this seems to have disrupted the stream continuum to a great deal and redistributed fish, resulting in the loss of at least one fish community overall, as well as various changes in the individual species habitat associations and then their associations with each other. Questions?
Time for a couple questions.
Yes.
What an impressive discovery of something, a project to track, to redo it. How did you come up with the idea? Who made you aware of the opportunity?
My advisor, who I'd gotten to know personally before embarking on this journey, had read the paper, and we had had several discussions that this would make a good project, especially for a master's sort of program. And it was at that point that I decided to go ahead and pursue this. And yeah, I mean, I ended up surveying. I think I had 50 sites that I collected fish from. I think we had a total of 37 species. I'm trying to remember the numbers off the top of my head now that Wright had discovered, and I had 34 species. So it was kind of interesting in that the numbers of species reduced slightly. These streams often had big shifts in the number of in their species composition. So, for example, Salmon Creek had nearly a 50% changeover in the species composition, yet it was still holding the same number of species it did 100